Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Stay Visionary podcast, where we dive into the minds of leaders who are shaping the future with technology and innovation. I'm your host, Ed Moran, and today we're joined by David Stifter, the founder and CEO of PredictAP Inc., a company using artificial intelligence to revolutionize accounts payables for the real estate industry. David's story bridges two worlds: deep real estate finance experience and cutting edge AI automation. His company helps operators process invoices faster, smarter, and with more accuracy, freeing teams to focus on growth, not paperwork. Let's jump in. Welcome, Dave.
Welcome. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
So why don't you tell us a little bit what your history is and how you came about and how you started PredictAP?
Yeah, no, so it was not a straight journey. So I'm an accountant by background, a geek at heart, and my whole career, I couldn't help but solve problems. And so I've always started from the business side and added technology to solve those problems. And so I was a custody fund accountant, which is the people who figure out the net asset value of mutual funds. And it's a tough job. You have half an hour every day to go to the Bloomberg, get your rates, and go out and crank it out. And if you get it wrong, you get yelled at. That was my first job out of college, and so it's my path started there, where we had this very small time frame. We had one machine per floor, like 100 accountants fighting to the death to like get in there and get their numbers. And I was like, this is madness. There must, and I'm a bit lazy at heart. I was like, how can I do this easier? And I found a way. This is back in the disk days. I found a way to get a disk and like preload it and put it in there, hit a button, get my things, and that 3-minute task turned into a 20-second task. And that was like, I went to my boss. I said, hey, we've got 3,000 people doing this in this critical time period. This saves like 5 minutes times 3,000, and that kind of started me on this path of process improvement. And so I've always had this need. My wife loves it. I always have to solve a problem. I can never just listen to it. But that was the path. And so as my career progressed, I got my MBA and then switched from that to working at Colony Capital. So Colony's a private equity fund that owned real estate around the world. So office, industrial, multifamily, and then later data centers, fiber networks, pretty much anything you can imagine. And my role there, I had a lot of different roles, but I always kept back to like fixing process, changing process, automating process. And so at one point, I ended up responsible for the Yardi system, which is their ERP accounting system. It's the main accounting system in real estate. So if you're not in real estate, you probably never heard of it, but it's a big company. So I ran that, and over the years for larger and larger parts of for Colony, and ended up in a role as managing director, leading all that accounting and finance technology. And so that was my background. Just lots of different roles here and there, but always going back to my core of let's use some tech and understanding of a business problem to solve a business problem. And that's where I came across PredictAP. It was we had merged a lot of different systems, this grand single unification system of going from 12 different systems around the world to one, and looking at where the time was being spent paying invoices. It's one of these things that not the most glamorous or exciting, but you have to do it. And in some industries, there's a lot of complexity about how you pay. It's not like Ed, you and I, we get our house bill and we send we send a check in or auto debit. There's a lot of complexity around who actually pays it. A big company like Colony has thousands of entities around the world.
Right.
The bill may say Colony, it's actually this little thing in this one town that has to pay it, right? And how does that get broken down? And the accounting behind it's really important, because in real estate, the company's not paying it. Usually that's passed through to the tenants and it's recovered up to certain limits and expensed in capital. It's all these rules. And so those rules typically just live in the heads of the folks that work in the company, and it takes years for them to look at how we did it before and figure it out. And for us, we had this woman, Krissa, who led AP in our company. She led a team of 30, and it was kind of working until she retired. And like multi-billion-dollar company, the wheels came off the bus because Krissa retired, and it's like that's a problem. And the quest to find something to help with that problem, I spent about a year in the market trying to understand what's out there and didn't find a solution.
Yes.
And that's where I came across this problem as a real problem, and no one had solved it.
It's important, like you said. You're working across multiple states, multiple and regulations for each state. Never mind national or local. So it could get quite complex, I imagine.
Yeah, and you have taxes, you have again, and the way you do it for office building is going to be different than industrial. Office, the tenant pays. Industrial, it's usually passed through, and or building under construction, the corp's probably going to pay it, or the construction team. So it's nuanced, a lot of what ifs, and so that's where it was a knowledge based problem, not a. If you talk about technology, it wasn't an OCR solution. There were plenty of OCR solutions in the market, which is I'm going to scrape that which is on the paper off, right? That Control C, Control V, right? I can take this off that. I think that's where a lot of tech companies sometimes they fail to appreciate the business problem, and they think they're solving it, but they're not. And that's what the market had, was that people saying, "Oh, I can copy the total off the invoice onto your system. Great, problem solved." It's like, no, that's not the problem. It's understanding, what are my 12,000 entities going to pay it, right? What's my accounting I need to do on this? That was the problem. And so that was that nuance that I found hadn't been solved.
Right. So you really have to break down, I would imagine, on a business to business basic, because everybody's a little different. It's the
Yeah.
same, but it's different, right?
Exactly, exactly. It's the same, but it's different. And it's not necessarily spelled out for you on the paper you're looking at. If you're the person entering this, it just says Colony Capital, right? But that's not who's paying, right? It's these 12 buildings. So you just know, oh, it's this $12,000 bill. It's one tenant. I have this post-it note that tells me it's these 12 buildings, and it's an office building, so I could pass it through. So I'm gonna code it that way. Well, except for this one building, it's vacant, so we're actually paying for it because there's no tenants, so we're gonna do it this way, right? And so that's where people do it. And it turns out
Yeah.
it's a really good use case for AI. And that's where after I looked at it, I thought, hey, back then, this is about 5, 6 years ago. So before all the current LLMs and all this great, amazing
Yeah.
tools we have now, but
Yeah.
it was machine learning, certain algorithms and things like that. And the challenge back then was annotation. How do you kind of teach the machine what you're looking at? And so I had this light bulb moment that said, well, actually, every time we've paid a bill, we've annotated data. So I have the image and I have the coding. I've explained through that coding how I want it to be. So an example of that might be a utility bill. So you think you just pay the total, right? Well, no, utilities, they're often a period behind, right? They're always a period behind. So if you pay the total, you're paying twice what you should pay. So actually what we want to pay is the current charges. So you say, okay, for this utility, I want to pay the current charges, not the total, right? And so it's an example of someone's done that. Someone's always picked the current charges. And so it lets the machine learning pick up on, oh, that's what I want, this, not that. And so you had really good structured data with annotation. You had a pattern to pick up on, right? It may say one thing, but mean something else. And I always equate this to your local coffee shop. My mom loves Starbucks, and I think the reason she loves it is not because the coffee's good, but I think it's because she can walk in there and they say, "Hi, Barbara," and they hand her
Yeah.
her drink. It's a personalization, so they know what her usual is, right? They know the context. Hey, it's Monday morning. It's a rainy day. Here's your hot tea, right? Or it's Friday. You're going out. Here's your espresso, right? It's what it says on there isn't necessarily what it's going to be there. There's context and nuance, and it's not explained explicitly. That's the concept of like personalization and what your usual is. Same thing with with these invoices, right? It's not necessarily spelled out on the
Mhm.
paper, but over time, someone understands what their usual is, and so there's a pattern to pick up on. And that usually turns into a post-it note for somebody. ML does a really good job of those. So we have structured data, we have a pattern, and the third piece, which I think is actually the most critical, is you still have a person in the loop. The ML
Yeah.
models, even
Yeah.
as amazing as they are now, they will make mistakes. They will hallucinate. They like to make you happy. They will lie to you. If I search like who's the most handsome man in the world, they'll be like Dave Stifter, right? I'm sure if you do it, it'll
Yeah.
say
Can
you, right?
you
They want to tell you.
elaborate on the hallucination a little bit for the audience?
Yeah. So what's important to understand is that these models, they intend to give you right answers, but more importantly, they want to make you happy. So an example of that is if I say, my company's PredictAP, and I say, what's the best coding, real estate AP coding company in the world? What's the best real estate coding company? They will tell me 100% PredictAP, because they know that'll make me happy. Now I hope
Well, it's the
they will
truth,
also tell
Dave.
that. Well, in this case, they're right on, right? So because they know the context, right? They
Yes.
know me. They know I work here. They know I own this company and I founded it and I'm invested in it. Someone else may get a different answer, right? My hope is that you can talk about GEO and kind of the new way models understand things, but when you ask a question to these models, they want to give you an answer that they think will make you happy, which may or may not be real, right? There's the stories of like lawyers looking for some certain case to prove their point and they got it, but it was all made up, and it's like you need to still have
Yes.
some basis of understanding. And
Yes.
that's where this use case of paying bills, well, the basic concept of segregation of duties, like you can't have one person getting vendors, reviewing vendors, paying vendors. Like that's like basic fraud 101. You always have to have two people in the loop. Has a mechanism for feedback. And so I have a way for someone to tell me, no, we sold that building, we bought this building, this is wrong, we can correct it. And that human in the loop is a really important thing for retraining the model.
So, what are you finding? What's the biggest pain point in your operations right now?
Yeah. So, so that was kind of the background of it, and I ended up making something internally with my company and realizing this was a problem everyone had, and so we about 5 years ago jumped from started up PredictAP and launched this, and so I will say it's been a very big learning curve for me from being responsible for technology in one company and buying technology to now selling technology and managing it and doing that in a SaaS environment where we have hundreds of or just over 100 clients now, public companies, very high level of scrutiny and control. I think a really big challenge is number one, really defining the problem we solve, which is this coding part and how that's different from other parts of AP and how it's different from other solutions out in the market. And the other part I think is integration with existing systems. I think there's so much promise and potential with AI right now. But even if we were the most perfect, like 100% accurate, always get it right, and I think we get it right at 90+%, but very good.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we were always right, if we can't do it in a way that's accessible to the business and doesn't disrupt all these other things, and it doesn't work with what they're doing, it's not valuable, right? It just becomes a distraction
Right.
in a science project. And so I think that integration with existing systems and the way we architect to do that's really important.
Explain. You mentioned with the other parts outside of their systems. How is that like a problem or an issue with integrating with your systems?
Yeah. And so first I have to think about workflow. And that exists with multiple things. So I have to think about, well, how do I train the model initially? Because back again, 6 years ago, you'd have to, annotate data and all that. So our problem was pretty good that we had a ready source. And so it's, how do I do that? And like I said, we are in real estate, which is different than, I'd say, some more industry, kind of horizontal, broad industry things where it's an open API ecosystem. Our main partner is Yardi, very big company. It's a multi-billion-dollar revenue company,
Yes.
but they are not necessarily an open system. So they have a process to go through to be an integration partner. So I'm not trying to have my clients each make a custom FTP and integration, and that stuff works until it doesn't, and I think it's a real weak point. And so we went through the work of being an API partner, and so to get set up for our customer, we've made it a very easy technical setup where they create this interface user. We pull history. We have on our own technology, we have no people in the loop, right? We use that history to build that model. So basically, they make this integration. We use the API. We pull the images. We pull the history. We go buy compute on AWS or Google for a week. It cranks, it figures it all out. It figures out all those implicit rules. So it's Monday, it's rainy. She wants this Starbucks. It's Friday. It's football season. We want that one. Building all those implicit rules of this.
So is it like a plug and play type system?
Exactly. So they don't have to make choices. They don't have to explain rules to us. They don't have to explain things. It's just they kind of give us the credentials. We pull it. We build the model without a person. Because there's also this temptation, I think, that AI means a lot of different things. I think a lot of folks maybe cheat a little bit and make some template based rules, and it's very tempting because you're like, it's very easy to say, if I see this, do this, but it's a bad road to scale, and it's a bad road to that. But yeah, integrating. And then when we're pushing invoices, we push them up to their system, and every night we pull it back to retrain the model. So their existing workflow and approval system still exists. If we're right, it goes through. If it's wrong, they'll correct. And then we pull that back every night to retrain the model. So it's really, from their perspective, we're not ripping out any core functionality. We're just taking a manual data entry step that used to be there. It's now automated. You don't have to retrain people on anything. They just do what they've always done. And if they correct things, we train. If it works, if it's right, which the vast majority is, they just go through and they're like, "Whoa, this is so much better than it used to be." So really try to make it minimally impactful for them.
So it kind of saves time, enhances service because it smooths all the systems. So you just kind of go without overthinking it,
Exactly.
so to speak. What kind of return on investment, or really, I think what's really important in business is time savings, are your clients seeing after adopting PredictAP?
Yeah, and there's two aspects of ROI, and time savings definitely. I think for a lot of these AI use cases, it's about a multiplier. And I think it can lead to discussions about, well, what does an AI enable you to do? And so if you think about just straight up, what is the time savings? It's about 80%, and so on average. And so if it takes 3 or 4 minutes on average for a typical simple invoice to be processed, it takes us about 10 to 15 seconds. And so it's a straight stopwatch time savings. We're also doing it much more consistently and much more accurately in big organizations. But there's another part of ROI that's, I think, harder to quantify, which is that knowledge retention. And so if you think about, if you wanted to go run a multifamily apartment complex, so you want to be a manager of a 300 unit apartment complex, and your first day on the job, it's like, well, welcome to your 300 residents, right? You need to know them. You need to interact. That's part of your job.
Yeah.
Welcome to your 20 staff. You need to know them. Well, here's the book of accounting for your new company, right? Well, when do I pay this or that or accrue this or that? Well, here's your new 100 vendors. Go, who cleans the toilets? Who, mows the
Yes.
lawn? Who, and so if you do that, it takes a while to learn all that. And then if you leave to go to the next building, well, the next person, they're stuck. They don't know what they're doing for 6 months. And that's really a big problem for like multifamily, assisted living, senior living, where, that's a lot of
Yes.
on-site. And the reason it's done on site is the knowledge is on site. And so we really help them not only reduce that time, but it keeps that information in the company. But also, what do you really want those on-site people doing is interacting with other people, not in the back room coding invoices.
Yeah, I would like you to go into more detail on that because real estate, as we know, has always been slow to embrace new technology. And with the AI coming in now, can you explain that a little deeper?
Yeah, yeah. So definitely real estate sometimes has lagged. I actually think with AI they're trying to, they're trying this time to come a bit of ahead. But there's all this stuff that needs to be done, especially on certain types of asset classes like office and senior living, where it is a tenant facing, every day people are there, right? And their residents have issues. There's leaky faucets, and there's people want to rent new space, and senior living. My great grandfather just moved from a place to another, and you have to make those relationships, talk to people. And I think if we talk about where AI is enabling, it's, well, that's what you want folks to do, is to do the human facing things on site, not the back office clerical. And I think people are starting to recognize that this back office clerical, people may call it office of the CFO or operations, but the reason a lot of these things were challenging was because it was very knowledge intensive. And before, there weren't really tools to do that. And I think that's where AI really has a great opportunity to solve some of these previously thought of problems that were hard because they're knowledge intensive. AI can help with those. And so I think now people are looking at, well, my bank reconciliation, I can do that, or chatbots or leasing agents or all these different things, or lease abstraction.
Regulations.
Yeah, regulations, taxes. There's a lot of things like that where AI can understand context a lot more, and again, get people out of clerical work into more higher value add work.
As AI is continue to evolve quickly, I might add, where do you see the next opportunity in real estate operations beyond invoice automation?
So opportunity, there's still a lot of low hanging fruit, I think. And I think what we're seeing right now is the AI market, I think, is going to two polar sides. So one, you have massive, massive dollars going to large industry agnostic LLMs and platforms that are meant to solve every problem, right? They are pretty good at everything, pretty much, right? Chat GPT, Grok, Gemini, whatever it is, Claude. Obviously, massive investment, and they are pretty good about whatever you throw at them. They're going to give you a pretty good answer. So we'll call that the horizontal platforms. On the other end of that spectrum is very narrow, very deep, specific use cases. So the problem with a generic LLM is that in general, they will answer general questions well, right? You can imagine the coffee thing. You can ask them, how do you make coffee? How do you get the beans? How do you roast them? How do you do any of that? And they can tell you. You could go make a coffee company off of that. They're not going to tell you what my mom wants on a Monday morning, right? They don't know. They don't have the context. They don't have the history. That is very specific and personal and nuanced. And so there's these questions of companies have very specific, very nuanced issues that come up, and that's where these narrow, deep applications come in. So in real estate, that could be lease abstraction, leasing, investor documents, side letters, taxes. For us, it's real estate invoices, where I need to understand the company specific chart of accounting policies, because they may capitalize an expense different than someone else. They have different entities than someone else. All of that could be very different. And so that's where we're fitting in. It's this very narrow, deep application. And there's a lot of good companies doing that. And you have obviously these amazing platforms that are doing a lot of things broadly very well, but they can't handle those very specific use cases.
Right. What leadership lessons have you learned building a company that bridges finance, operations, and AI?
Ooh, leadership lessons. It is, well, I've learned a lot. I'm always learning. Every day I'm learning. So I had a very, different role before where I managed tech within a company, and I had one company to worry about. Now I have 100 companies. And so, leadership as far as, prioritizing what needs to get done. And there's, there's 1,000 things we could do, and really understanding what we should do, and how do you get, balance that, right, with making sure customers are performing, their issues are dealt with, that we're looking to expand in the future, that we're taking care of our back office infrastructure, right? Because you can let things slide there, but you're gonna, you're taking a risk. And so all of that prioritization of conflicting things is a big challenge for startups. And I also think not getting distracted by the shiny object, right? Not getting distracted by the technology, and keeping that North Star on the business problem, right? I think once you start to get enamored with the tech and then bring that to bear on the problem, as opposed to, hey, I have to really understand my customer's problem. And then I find out, because sometimes it's not even tech that solves it, it's process or whatever. I understand, well, this is one of the tools that can solve that. Then you start to make, back to that point about, well, how do you really solve a customer's problem? It's not the method you use, it's the solution that comes out of it, right? And so, that's a big thing, I think, is keeping that focus on the customer, prioritizing it properly, and then enabling my people to do it, right? Getting the right people, keeping them motivated, removing
Right.
barriers from that. I think it's a big role as a leader, is just getting rid of the distractions for my folks and letting them do their thing.
If you're really good at solving solutions, everything else will come. Having the right
Exactly.
processes and
Exactly.
thing. And finally, if you could give me one piece of advice to business owners hesitant about AI, what would it be?
Yeah, so you're going to be in a tough spot if you ignore it. So you have to look at, where does it help your business? And I think there's a few lenses you need to look at it through. So I think number one is personal enablement. Everyone should be on this path, right? Because there's a lot of fear about AI, especially for workers who are moving up in the world, and they're like, well, is AI going to replace me? And it's like, no, it's not. I mean, in 1900, half of America worked as farmers, right? And the tractor came. It's like, well, the roles change, right? And I think tech is not going to make humans obsolete, but folks that, are able and capable and use AI are going to be much more competitive than folks that don't. So it's not that AI is going to replace the roles. It's people who use AI will have a real advantage over people who don't. And so I think at the minimum, you need to look at AI enablement, right? For scheduling, for emailing, for creating, first drafts and refining, and all that stuff that these generalist models do very, very well. Canva for slides, and it is amazing how much more you can get done on that personal enablement side. The other side, I think there's going to be problems that you have been facing for a long time that are valuable problems, and maybe they were not really solvable before, but with AI maybe they are. And so I think you should evaluate where you think there's some opportunities that were previously difficult to solve, and then have a thought around build versus buy. That's a whole nother discussion. I think if there's a player in the market that's specialized in this, you should look at them first, because I think that's an interesting thing with AI, where you can get that first few steps of solving a problem done very easily with these tools, and then the next steps are hard. It's like with my own company, we raised over $10 million of funding. It's like the first part was very easy, getting that invoice number, total due date, but we spent years and millions of dollars to get the next part. And so that, there's an understanding of what you actually want to make, but you kind of build, by the core, build the edge. That's nuanced with you, but find those problems. Don't do this massive big bang, I want to change my whole company, but find a problem and solve it. Right. And then you'll
Yeah,
find other problems. There's be a snowball effect.
yeah, well said. Well said, Dave. Thank you for joining us today. Your story truly shows how AI can simplify and scale even the most traditional parts of real estate. To our listeners, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share the podcast so you never miss another visionary conversation. And as always, stay visionary.